So, hi, Richard. We are going to get started, and folks will probably continue to join, but welcome. My name is Deeohn Ferris. I am the Associate Director for Institutional Giving, and I'm going to just share a few items of housekeeping before we kick things off. So first of all, you probably saw when you joined that this meeting is being recorded so that we can share it with the folks who are unable to join us live. We wanted to have everybody's faces visible so that we could see you and feel like we're getting something close to a real in-person meeting, but definitely feel free to turn your camera off at any point. If you do have any technical issues, please just type them into the chat, and Angel Eason, the Program and Operations Coordinator for our US program team, will assist you with that. We are going to leave the chat on, so feel free to use it to connect with each other, even as we're talking, and also to share questions that you have for the presenters and the panelists. We might not address the questions until later in the program, but we are keeping track of them and collecting them as you submit them. I just linked the program agenda in the chat, and I'll outline that for you. I'll link it again if others just joined and don't see it. But we're going to start with some introductory remarks from our board chair and ISC's longtime president. Then we will hear from ISC's current president, Deeohn Ferris. And then the meat of the program will be a panel conversation with our US program team about equity-led resilience. And then at the end, we'll open up the floor for questions and answers from you guys, the participants, for about 15 minutes. As we begin, I do want to pause to acknowledge the indigenous peoples of all the lands where we are living and working today. Here in Vermont, I sit on land that was traditionally called Indakina and cared for by the Western Abenaki. Let's all just take a moment to kind of make contact with the ground, maybe through your feet or your seat or your hands, and give thanks for the people who stewarded this land before us, who have endured centuries of hardship and who steward it still. The theme of our event today is called Creating Community. So I'm going to move from thanking our Indigenous community elders to thanking our organizational community elders. We have with us today at least one of our initial founders of ISC. I think Madeline, if she's not here, may join us at some point, Governor Cunin. We also have George Hamilton. Both of them have retired from their official roles at ISC in the past year, but they still seem to like us enough to come back and visit. So we're thrilled to have them. And you're going to hear from George in just a bit. One more person who's been around since the earliest days of ISC, believe it or not, 30 years ago, and is still serving in an official capacity is Jonathan Lash. He's the chair of ISC's board. He's led a number of great institutions over the years, including most recently Hampshire College, before that the World Resources Institute. I think you will find him to be very wise. I do. He knows a thing or two about community, and I will turn the floor over to Jonathan now to say a few words.
Thank you, Deeohn. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We really ought to be at Shelburne Farms, particularly on a day like this, looking out over the lake and the lawn and getting to connect with one another directly. But it couldn't happen this year. It will happen soon. I'm so glad you could join us this morning. It's a chance to connect old friends and new friends, and in particular, for those of you who haven't met her yet, to meet our president, Deeohn Ferris. That it's a delight for me to be able to join her with you. Despite all we have been through in the past 18 months, ISC is thriving. And it's just a remarkable tribute to the ISC staff. This is a moment at which we have both necessity, urgency, and opportunity. And the staff has risen to that in these months. a moment when community justice and climate could not be more important and could not connect more powerfully than they do now in all that we see. And as you will hear from the staff panel, ISC is operating at the intersection of those values. I'm incredibly proud to have been associated with this organization for a long time, and very, very pleased to be able to introduce an old and dear friend. I'd hoped Madeline would be with us to be introduced, but I'm very glad to be able to introduce George Hamilton, who I've known for all of ISC's life, and before that, when we both had the honor to work with Madeleine Kunin when she was governor. George, whose commitment and vision and warmth and incredible determination over the years of ISC's history built this organization, and then who showed his wisdom and grace in the way he has made the decision to move on and to support Deeohn as she's taken over. George, who has been a friend to many of us and the voice of this organization for so long. George, it's good to see you and welcome.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, everybody, and welcome, everyone. So great to see so many old and new faces, new friends. And I think this is, Jonathan obviously said it beautifully. This has been a great time for this organization, and I'm so proud of the job Deeohn and the staff have done to take ISC to a new level. And despite very challenging times, you've done a terrific job. Couldn't be more proud of what you've accomplished. And I think, welcome, and I think I'm looking forward to the program, and I think we should get right to it and get right to Deeohn, who's going to lead us on this beautiful explanation of our work. Thank you, Deeohn.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I want to begin by just saying good morning, everyone, and greetings. Welcome to our event today, to new friends and old friends. We're excited to be with you today. As Jonathan mentioned, it would be great to be in person, and we're moving forward with that. We're actually hoping to convene an event in Vermont sometime in the fall before the weather changes, where we can all enjoy Shelburne Farms and everything else that the wonderful state of Vermont has to offer. I want to thank you, Jonathan, for your opening remarks, and George for your kind words. It's my pleasure to virtually be with everyone today and share how the Institute for Sustainable Communities is creating community and climate change solutions in these challenging times. I want to begin by saying how honored I am to steward the Institute's work and take over the reins from a wonderful leader for so many years, George Hamilton, and how appreciative I am to be walking side by side in this journey with very capable and esteemed board chair, Jonathan. So thank you both. I want to share with you a bit about the Institute's equity-centered, community-led, and locally led climate change interventions and sustainability. And that's what we're about with this event today. Before we get started on the gory details of that wonderful work, I want to share with you a little bit about how I got to the Institute for Sustainable Communities. When I was in law school, I had no firm idea about my career journey, but I was drawn to cause-oriented work due to my experiences as a young Black woman, understanding the contributions of African Americans and the legacy of enslavement in this country. I wanted to do work for the good of my community. I wanted to do work for the public good. My environmental law classes were eye-opening. I connected to the subject because of the pollution legal cases. And that's likely because growing up, my mother told me stories about family in Sioux City, Iowa, and the African American community there. The town dump was in my mom's neighborhood, which is not surprising now, given the statistics showing that disproportionately communities of color live close to many types of unhealthy environmental hazards. I think it's cosmic that the job offer that appealed to me most after graduating from law school was with the United States Environmental Protection Agency. Things have changed now, but at the time, African-American lawyers in the field were few and far between. EPA work was fulfilling, leading enforcement teams, tackling issues from the hot button to the mundane. I was very invested in the work. EPA is where I came face to face with unequal environmental protection. I saw people of color and people with low incomes who looked like me, whose neighborhoods and lands were disinvested, redlined, and inundated with a crisscross of chemical plants, refineries, toxic waste sites, and mining-related sources of air, land, and water pollution. At the same time, these communities typically were grappling with intertwined low wealth and incomes, health disparities, inadequate schools, and economic dislocation. I saw government decisions actively thwarting community resiliency. Topping off all of this, exclusion from information and government decisions that resulted in these inequities was pretty much the norm. Prioritizing racial equity and community crystallized for me then. I found my calling. Leveling the playing field for communities everywhere would be my life's work. And I've been at the forefront working for environmental and economic justice ever since. These are the reasons why I was drawn to the Institute for Sustainable Communities. Many of you know that the Institute has a storied history. We've got a 30-year legacy. This is our 30th year anniversary. We have a 30-year legacy that includes 130 transformative projects in over 30 countries, successfully integrating equity while working with communities and other local stakeholders, regional and local government, nonprofits, major corporate brands, philanthropy, and academia, working across sectors around the important issues of climate change and sustainability. It's a hallmark of the Institute's innovation track record that our co-founder, Governor Madeline Kunin, centered equity for women in the environmental and sustainability space 30 years ago. And we're building on the foundation of that work, continuing to prioritize equity with communities, countries, regions, cities, and manufacturers. We collaborate with and amplify the voices and knowledge of leaders in communities that experience the most harm from environmental degradation and climate change. Our critical work helps identify assets and needs. It builds skills and expertise, and we drive community resilience by strengthening racially and culturally diverse knowledge networks, interdisciplinary leaders, and leaders of color. Climate change is a threat multiplier on top of existing racial, economic, health, and social factors. In the United States, it's not just the African-American community in Sioux City, where my mother grew up, facing environmental inequities. Being Black and brown in the United States is a leading determinant of an individual's economic strata, lived experiences, and environmental reality, on top of whether or not people live close to unhealthy environmental hazards. When you factor in economic discrimination, income inequality, and housing discrimination, factor in also that according to US EPA, Black Americans are exposed to 1.5 times more pollution than white Americans. Our experience at the Institute shows that equitable climate solutions, solutions that address gaps and leave no one behind, enable everyone to bounce forward from overlapping systemic and legal barriers to resiliency and prosperity. That's why we're intentional about equity and inclusion at the Institute, and in particular, racial equity in the United States. We're intentional about it both internally as our organization grows and develops, and externally in the communities and with the constituencies that we serve. Equity is one of the Institute's chief strengths, particularly the ways we couple our technical expertise and support with the science and data of equity, inclusivity best practices, and shaping, designing, and driving equity-centered solutions. Our work at the Institute is more urgent now than ever. Just over the past year, Black Lives Matter, the worldwide racial and social justice protests, and the COVID-19 pandemic blew the lid off race, justice, and equity seemingly everywhere. People around the world are making their voices heard. The Institute is poised to harness this significant momentum for change and desire for equitable climate change solutions. We are the right organization at the right time to do this incredibly important work. We are changing the manner in which climate solutions are implemented, ensuring those closest to the issues are centered in the dialogue and in the solutions. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a terrific program in store for you. We're highlighting our US program today, and it's important to note, we are cross-pollinating the lessons learned here in the United States with our international programs, and we're crosswalking solutions in our international work for implementation here at home. Now I'll turn it over to Jamie Love, the Institute's Director of US Programs, who will provide you with deeper insight into our domestic work. I look forward to our question and answer session at the end of our program. Now, Jamie, over to you.
Thank you, Deeohn. So I'm going to give a broad, brief overview of our US programs before we jump into our panel discussion with a few of our team members. So first, I'll start with telling you a little bit about our team and our work. This is a picture of our lovely rockstar US program team. Many of you have worked with several of these team members. And really our focus, as Deeohn alluded to, is on communities of color. We are really using this space to make sure that we are working at the crux of racial equity and supporting leaders of color who are working in communities of color to increase their capacity and climate resilience through community-driven solutions, because we know that those who are most impacted by the problems are also those who are closest to the solutions. And so we want to harness that and lift that up in communities that we're working with across the country. Next slide. So our US program really has two approaches. First is our community-led resilience work, and this is where we are focused on community-based nonprofits that are led by people of color. They're working in the communities with the highest needs. We really work to assess what's happening in those communities, find out what the greatest challenges are, and then be able to co-design solutions and strategies based on what our community partners are saying. We deliver capacity building and technical assistance through this work, and we are really focused on elevating the community influence and power building of these local leaders. We know that the climate field is a white-dominated space, and so changing the face of climate, getting more people of color into the forefront to be seen and viewed as leaders, and showcasing their leadership and power building in their communities is really critical. And then our second approach is through community and government collaborations. And we've been working in this space for a while, for about 10 years in the US program. And it had been very government driven in the past. And we've really worked to shift that focus to make it community and government collaborations, to work across these different sectors, to really integrate community voice and center equity into the governmental design and policies that are happening. And so we're working to really foster more community and cross collaboration in different sectors, and really be able to leverage the resources and relationships that are going to move policy actions forward in local communities. Next slide. So this is a brief snapshot of our community-led work. We currently have 4 projects that are working across the country. We are supporting 39 community-based organizations, 30 of which are led by and serving people of color, and we're in 19 different states. And we hope that this work continues to grow and move across the country as we are supporting these local leaders. And you can go to the next slide. The way that we do that is really looking to implement our community needs assessment and then using that to inform the program delivery that we offer. There are three main buckets that we really work in: capacity support, technical assistance, and network and relationship building. And these areas are really crucial to the capacity support is really about the peer learning. We know that our local leaders are also experts and can learn from each other. So we want to lift that up. Providing coaching and getting them in contact with other experts and technical consultants. And then through some of our work, we provide sub-awards through the funding that we receive. And in some capacities, we serve as a national program office where we work in collaboration with foundation partners to support the capacity needs of their grantees. Secondly, our technical assistance, where we can help provide data and analysis on what's happening in community. We design a lot of knowledge products and tools that can be used by community partners, and helping with the co-design and evaluation of their work. And then finally, the network and relationship building. We offer both in-person and virtual convenings, cohort calls and learning exchanges between different groups, and then one-on-one knowledge sharing between individual organizations and between ISC and those organizations to really lift up the knowledge and learnings that's happening across these different cohorts. Next slide. And so for our second approach, which is the community and government collaborations, as I stated, we've really been building off of work that has been done at ISC for many years. We're currently working with the Southeast Florida Climate Compact, which you'll hear a little bit more about. And then we are also just reimagining and resetting our approach to how we can build these regional collaborations. So really working to center community, as I said, to center racial equity. So looking at where there are regional equity movements happening, those on the ground community organizations, combined with regional climate resilience opportunities. What are organizations doing and what are local governments doing that are addressing climate resilience in their community? And then also, what are the economic development impacts of that? We know that there are many clean and green jobs that are booming throughout this field, and there's lots of opportunity to drive policy and to connect folks into different networks. And so the convergence of those three areas is really the focus of what we're trying to center through this regional collaboration work. And we'll share a little bit more about that through our panel discussion. And so now I will move on to my esteemed colleagues. And we have three of our US team members here participating in the panel today, who can really talk about the areas that we're working in, focused on community-based organizations, serving as a national program office with foundations, and then working on our community and government collaborations approach. So I'm going to give the opportunity for each of them to tell us a little bit about themselves and the model that their projects focus on. And I'll start with Sonia.
Thanks, Jamie. It's a pleasure to be with everyone today. I'm Sonia Joshi. I'm an Associate Director of U.S. Programs, and I lead the Partnership for Resilient Communities. And at its core, the Partnership for Resilient Communities centers leaders of color in the climate and clean energy space. The model of the Partnership for Resilient Communities is that people of color should be leading efforts to address climate inequities within their own communities. ISC, what we do is we provide the strategic, the financial, and technical support to leaders of Black and Brown community-based organizations. This allows us to emphasize building out a national network of climate resilient leaders of colors. And really, we are focused on shifting power through climate leaders of color who are prioritizing policy and equity within their communities.
Thank you, Sonia. Rose?
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. My name is Rose Berry. I reside in Georgia. I use they, them, she, her pronouns, and I am a senior program officer with ISC'S US-based programs. And I work most closely with the Climate Change, Health, and Equity, or CCHE initiative, in partnership with the Kresge Foundation. And the CCHE initiative really works to build the capacity of healthcare institutions, health practitioners, and community-based organizations to move policy reform, programs, and other solutions and interventions at the intersections of climate, health, and equity. ISC works within a national program office role with this initiative, as Jamie previously mentioned. And we really work to co-design and carry out capacity building and peer learning support for grant-funded partners across the initiative, while emphasizing an equity-centered approach to the work. We also serve as the National Program Office on the Health and Climate Solutions Initiative in partnership with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, working with our partners to ensure successful management and implementation of the overall initiative.
Thank you, Rose. And Russell?
Hi, thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everybody. My name is Russell Paez. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm an associate director of the U.S. programs based in Seattle, so it's very early for me. I lead one of the older U.S. programs at ISC, which is a partnership between ISC and the Southeast Florida Regional Climate Change Compact that Jamie had mentioned, comprising of 4 counties in that region. It was established a decade ago and built on a model that in order to make scalable climate impacts and solutions meant building capacity of local government at a local and regional level. And so ISC supports them through regional coordination and collaboration of peer-to-peer learning and convenings, sharing of knowledge and tools, and unifying their political voice when possible. And as Jamie had mentioned, recognizing that this model can be very insular and lack equity focus, thanks to the Kresge Foundation, they provided ISC a 1-year grant as an opportunity to really reimagine what regional collaboration with equitable climate solutions could look like. And as part of a 1-year pilot initiative, we've called it the Regional Collaboration for Equitable Climate Solutions. ISC is developing a set of trainings that include beyond local government, but a diverse and cross-sector stakeholders to foster and collaborate on innovative solutions that local governments can advance in their climate planning and implementation.
Thanks, Russell. So we all know that climate change is a huge issue. What are some of the innovative ways that ISC is approaching this work? And what ways do you feel this has been most effective? And I'm going to start with Sonia.
Yeah, thank you. So as was mentioned earlier, ISC is centering racial equity within our work, and we are emphasizing working with Black and Brown-led organizations and supporting their leadership development so that they are having the greatest impact within their communities. What's innovative of how we're doing this is we are really tailored in how we are working and engaging with communities and with leaders within the communities. So we provide one-on-one as well as cohort-wide professional development opportunities that really speak to the needs that they are sharing with us. So whether it's technical training to build their knowledge on topics such as clean energy and solar panels, or strategic support, so that while they are small organizations that are trying to develop green infrastructure, address rain gardens and other issues of flooding within their community, they also have support to build out communications and celebrate the work that they are doing. One specific example I'd like to share is with the work with our partners in New Orleans, the Healthy Community Services organization, which is really comprised of a coalition of 4 organizations. They've broadened their work, knowing that limiting themselves to really just focusing on rain garden installation, planting of trees, installation of paver sidewalks and paver driveways to address flooding issues is significantly important and has prevented upwards of 25,000 gallons of rainwater from no longer being able to flood their local neighborhoods and local communities. But they realize that that's not enough, that really being engaged in advocacy is incredibly important. And that's something that wouldn't have happened had we not really been engaged with them from the outset to address this work.
Thank you, Sonia. Rose, what are your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Jamie. So I think what makes ISC's approach innovative within our National Program Office role in particular is that we really function as a bridge. So carrying relationships between funders, grant-funded partners, initiative partners, and advisors. ISC also carries insight to work happening on the ground and can therefore craft programming within the best interests of frontline communities. I also think because of ISC's work to understand the specific needs of grant-funded partners, we're able to design custom capacity building and technical assistance opportunities, such as data metrics and evaluation, so that grant-funded partners are strengthening how they're measuring success, and trainings on incorporating communication strategies into equity-centered climate resilience campaigns. You know, one specific example of the impacts of these supports is that as a result of the strategic communications training offered during the first phase of the CCHE initiative, one of the grant-funded partners, Public Health Institute of Western Massachusetts, plans to launch a committee of local community leaders and artists to develop a communication strategy, really amplifying their work toward clean energy, energy-efficient funding, and green jobs. And so, you know, the capacity building support that we offer for folks doing work on the ground, we're hoping won't just provide them with additional capacity to go wider or broaden their work, but actually to go deeper and deepen their impact in their communities.
That's great, thank you. So how is the idea of equity-led resilience manifested in your work? Can you share some examples of what this looks like in practice? I'm going to go to Russell.
Thanks, Jamie. You know, I think we have seen this, we have seen that this continues to be a challenge with government-led approaches in the climate space. I think that this is what we're trying to do to address with the pilot initiative and rethink about how regional collaboration could look like in an equitable and inclusive way. Specifically with the compact, however, you know, ISC continues to guide them on ways to infuse how climate impacts connect with the needs and or solutions with frontline communities and truly embody what it means to be equity-led in every fabric that they do. I'm not gonna lie, it's there's been some hard, difficult conversations sometimes, but I feel like they're making a lot of headway and progress in trying to really think about building equity in their process at the very beginning.
Thanks, Russell. Rose, what do you think about the equity-led resilience work?
Thanks, Jamie. So I really think that equity-led resilience helps to highlight the impact of gaps and imbalance in institutions, systems, and structures, and works to create solutions and interventions to address them. And so that's what ISC does in our National Program Office role. During the pandemic, for instance, we were able to pivot peer learning and capacity building program to really speak to the shifting needs of grant-funded partners. Some examples of those offerings included digital organizing training, virtual grantee gatherings, and supporting grant extension, and then I also want to add that the groups that ISC supports are addressing the compounded impacts of inequity. So like Deeohn and other folks so far have spoken to, you know, really addressing that just like the solutions need to operate at the intersections of these issues, folks are also facing the impacts of inequities at these intersections. So one example is groups are addressing health impacts of urban heat island effects and the financial impacts of energy burden, but they're also addressing the housing crisis and the displacement of low wealth communities. And that's really why ISC advocates for funding for community-based organizations' resilience strategies that might otherwise get overlooked by large foundations such as resilience hubs, housing and transportation justice work, and divest invest campaigns.
Thank you. And so I'm going to pose this last question, which is, what are you looking forward to in the next phase of the work? And what does your project need to scale up? I'm going to start with Sonia.
Sure. So first, I just want to acknowledge and thank the JPB Foundation for supporting the Partnership for Resilient Communities. And right now with the Partnership for Resilient Communities, we are working with 10 partners, 10 community-based organizations. And what I'm looking forward to is to bring in additional partners so that we can continue to build out our national network of climate leaders of color. It would be really exciting to see the development of peer-to-peer learning across cohorts. So lessons learned from our 10 community-based organizations and how they can really share with broad other partners that we would be bringing in. Also within ISC, we are committed to working within all urban communities throughout the country so that we are centering people of color in climate resilience. So ideally, it would be wonderful if we had partners in all urban communities throughout the country and that those would be our partners. So I'm really looking forward to broadening our work to address other climate justice issues, including issues of transportation and energy sovereignty within communities of color.
Thanks, Sonia. And Russell, what would you say for the regional work?
I'm really looking forward to help shape the evolution of the compact and how they continue to center equity in what they do as a regional collaborative. Serving 6 million people down in Southeast Florida region. I think there's a lot of potential opportunity there to really bring the community voice to the table. In addition, I'm really excited about the outcome of the Regional Collaboration for Equitable Climate Solutions initiative this year. And what it takes to scale up is really, honestly, additional funding so that we can bring it to a national, bring it as a national program that could be utilized across the country.
Thank you. Well, this was a brief snapshot into the U.S. programs and some of our work and our vision for the future. Definitely happy to answer additional questions today, but also if anyone wants to reach out for more details, we're happy to provide that. But before we go to the Q&A, we thought that you might like to hear from some of our community partners and how they view the work with ISC and just get a little snapshot and feeling of the recent convenings that we've held virtually over the last couple of months for our partners across the country.
What an honor to be in community with all of you today. Ashe. It's such an honor. It's been a really difficult year where it's become increasingly challenging to be upbeat. We've lost childhood friends and family. Literally, the front line of the climate crisis has been the most impacted by COVID. So how do we talk about where we're heading and what we're seeing and where we are and how we got here? Like climate change, the conditions of our communities are the consequence of a long history of extraction. We share legacies of fighting colonialism as well as race, class, and gender oppression while advocating for environmental and climate justice. We are the descendants of enslavement, colonialism, and extraction. And our communities are the first and most impacted by the storms, the fires, the floods, and droughts, and are disproportionately burdened by pollution, poverty, and systemic violence associated with white supremacy, capitalism, and the multinational corporations driving these ecological crises. This is not a future problem. This is happening right now. If we just remember, some examples that have happened in the recent past, like Hurricane Katrina. I remember what it looked like to see those bodies going by on my television screen. And as painful as it is, I want to remember so that I am inspired and moved to fight as hard as I can to prevent that ever happening again.
Mike Thomas with the Garfield Park Community Council here in Chicago. We just want to start off kind of how Ricky ended by just thanking the entire PRC family for pulling off, I mean, such an authentic and powerful conference, such a refreshing, rejuvenating time virtually, which was just amazing. So kudos to you, PRC, for doing that, and the powerful speakers that you brought in for us to learn from, be inspired by. So we're truly grateful. I just think where we wanted to commit to, the Garfield Park Community Council, is continue to commit to building up our local leaders, and especially specifically their capacity around climate issues. We're starting to do that. We have some green infrastructure projects, some carbon neutral housing projects that are coming in the neighborhood. So we'll have some things to point to where we can continue that capacity building issues around climate issues. And then lastly, is just continuing to develop the next generation of our youth leaders in our neighborhood that will ultimately be the leaders in our community and our city. So thank you again, everybody, for your time, and we really enjoyed ourselves.
Thank you. I'm Kimberly Doley with Healthy Community Services, part of the Waterwise Collaborative in New Orleans. There's so many amazing takeaways. This has been really validating for us and the work that we're doing, and really confirmed that we're not alone, that we have this larger community that we can draw on for inspiration, support, encouragement, ideas. And it's just validating that the collaborative work we've been doing is working.
For us, my team and I, we could go on and on about what we really appreciated about the sessions and key takeaways. I think for us, and part of what we're going to continue to commit to, is around youth leadership and youth development. How do we pass the baton? What does community succession planning look like? How do you integrate new families that come into your community and give them a sense of place, a sense of self, a sense of pride of that new community, so that you can integrate them into the mission and the work and the fight forward. We also commit to reaching out to our brothers and sisters around the table. We were merging with our resiliency hubs, and I think there's just so much we can do to collaborate and build on the discussion today, so that it's not just a session, but it could become a practice.
So if we understand that policy can be damaging, we also then understand that policy can be flipped, that policy can be infused with positive energy, with actions and accountability to help make real change happen. Because when we don't do that, we get things like Jim Crow laws. And yes, we still see the reverberation of those even today. There are all these examples of Black and brown and indigenous folks who have been doing transformational work, but the platforms weren't there and the spotlight wasn't placed on this incredibly important sets of work to make real change happen. And I would just close out with this by saying that we now have a number of opportunities that are happening in relationship to the infrastructure bill and our stimulus bills and a number of other things that now place the resources with the great ideas that each and every one of you have had to make real change happen. Dr. King said that we come to these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now. We're all in the same boat, even though there are different impacts that are happening in relationship to systemic racism. It affects all of us. We're all in the same boat in relationship to the pandemic. Yes, certain groups are dying at higher rates, but we all know that everyone can be impacted. And of course, we're all in the same boat when it comes to this climate crisis. I look forward to engaging with each and every one of you all. I want to thank you so much for a few moments of your time. And I want to thank you for the incredible work that I know many of you have been doing for decades.
All right, I want to thank Jamie and Sonia and Rose and Russell. That was so great to hear that glimpse of all the ways that ISC is engaging with communities, and then to hear the voices of our partners themselves. So we are nearing the end but we want to open things up for a wider conversation and hear from all of our participants today. So this is time for Q&A. You can address questions to Deeon or to any of the panelists. You can ask them in the chat or you can ask them out loud. If you want to ask out loud and you want to use the raise your hand function, it's kind of the reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and then raise your hand. I'll keep an eye out for those. Otherwise, you can always just unmute yourself and speak up. So I see we have one question in the chat, but I also see some raised hands. I'm going to start with David Grant I saw first, and then maybe we'll do the question from the chat, and then we'll get to Jen. All right, David, you're up. Go ahead and unmute.
Great, thanks, Devin, and thanks to everybody who spoke. Appreciated it. Loved hearing from the partners too. You know, I had a question forming in my mind, and the last speaker, Mustafa Santiago Ali, referred to the infrastructure bill, and my question was whether Deeon, maybe I could ask you directly, when you said ISC is the right organization at the right time, to what extent does the Biden-Harris administration, to what extent is it part of the right time? In other words, are policies now directly or indirectly affecting your ability to lead with equity?
Well, thank you for your question, David. Putting all this work that we do in context, I think the first thing for us to all acknowledge is that this has been a tremendous year in terms of re-spotlighting, shining the sunlight on racial inequalities around the world, police violence and brutality against people of color around the world, the lack of economic prosperity between in comparison between Black and Brown and Indigenous peoples and other peoples around the world. And we're at a place of new momentum around attention to these issues by countries, by governments, by communities, by nonprofits, by academia, by philanthropy. We are at what is so often referred to as an inflection moment in the world. And given our track record, our history, our experiences, our knowledge of best practices and our relationships, not only in the US, but globally, the confluence of these assets puts ISC in a strong position to be able to share our knowledge, to be able to share our expertise and thought leadership across sectors in ways, first of all, that helps all stakeholders understand that we all have a role in changing the course of climate on the planet, and that we all have responsibilities and areas of intervention where we can work together and find common purpose to ensure, as we've said so often in this past hour, that everyone gets to benefit from the clean energy revolution, that everyone gets to benefit from the attention to environmental quality and green and open space and nature, and ensure that everyone is able to appreciate and benefit from health and environmental changes that result from the political momentum that we're seeing around the world. In terms of the Biden administration in the US compared to the Trump administration, the Biden-Harris administration is a catapult in this country. For the first time, I've been working with communities and across stakeholders around equity and environment and conservation, equity and climate change and sustainability for a very, very long time. So I've seen the ebbs and the flows of these conversations. And in all of these years, my sense and my feeling is that this is the most dynamic time ever for people of color and other peoples around the world to come together and continue to push hard around the solutions that are going to ensure that there are no gaps and that there is no one left behind. There's also the very scintillating aspect of the global clean energy revolution and the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars in investments that are going to be made in renewable energy and energy efficiency and energy retrofits and green and affordable housing and resetting the built environment to ensure that nature is a component. This is a unique time economically for us to be looking at the tools and the instruments of ensuring once again, that we have a level economic playing field and that everyone has the opportunity to benefit from those trillions of dollars of investments. So in sum, I'd say this is a very dynamic time. The people have spoken and are continuing to speak with dynamism around driving solutions and moving forward solutions. And when you twin that with the existential impact of climate change, the fact that if we don't start working together and use this catapult and use this dynamism in this time, that very soon we may find there's no planet for us to exist upon. I hope that's a helpful answer.
Thanks, Deeohn. We are going to address Sandy's questions since it's really specific in the chat. And move on to Jen Patrick. So go ahead, Jen, with your question.
Great, thank you. And in fact, my question is directly related to the last question. So thank you, David, for raising that. You know, one of the things that we keep, I'm with the JPB Foundation and within the philanthropic community, we keep hearing about how are we going to help, to your point, Deeohn, in terms of leveling the playing field. How do we help frontline communities access the increased funding that's already come from past legislation, but that could be coming? And, you know, in terms of ISC being sort of the right organization at the right time, one of the things that I think is really interesting to explore further is, you know, what type of capacity is needed to help build, you know, to help the frontline communities access all of this increased funding. And I feel like that's an important piece of what you all are doing. And I know we just addressed sort of the larger issues and really thinking forward about what kind of support you might need to help others.
Should I take a stab at that?
And that wasn't directed, I'm sorry, I should have, sure, you know, to the whole team, which is fantastic, but sure, go ahead. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, that's fine. And please, team, I've got a terrific team. Anyone that wants to add value to this response, please feel free to do so. I'd say at the outset, Jen, that one of the chief strengths that we bring to the table is relationships. And the ability to cultivate and nourish and sustain relationships and trust in ways that really facilitates our ability to bring a cross-section of stakeholders that very often have differing views and come to the table with differing strategies, often conflicting strategies around how to work together. It's our relationships that help us bring folks to the table in conversations that really are the predicate to problem solving. You can't get to problem solving until you get to relationships and trust. And very often, unlike the JPB Foundation and others that fund ISC, this is where philanthropy and other stakeholders want the biggest bang for the buck for the least resources. And there really has to be an investment, a quality investment in developing the relationships and the trust that are the foundation for working together. The second thing I'd say that is one of our chief strengths is that we are collaborative educators. And we understand that it isn't enough to set a table with stakeholders. It is also imperative to ensure that every stakeholder around the table is understanding the complexities of the issues that we're talking about, and that is able at that table to speak apples to apples and oranges to oranges to each other. Very often it's thought that communities are the sector that need the most work in that regard. It is our direct experience, and certainly mine over many decades, that industry needs as much capacity building and technical assistance, as does local and regional government, as does the corporate sector. So there needs to be an investment in that understanding that part of building relationships and trust and coming to a common understanding is resourcing that really fundamental work that gets you to the point where you can start to build consensus, because folks are starting to understand each other, understanding the work of their sector as well as how it intersects with other sectors, and get to the point of beginning to deliberate about what are the collaborative and consensus-oriented solutions that are going to get us where we need to go. The next point I want to mention is that in the colloquial, there's a good deal of hand-holding that has to happen in this work. It's not sufficient to introduce folks in working together. It's imperative that we provide the support to help folks build the relationships that lead to the point of being able to work together. And then once we get to a point of common purpose, understanding that as we want to intersect with governmental agencies, or we want to intersect with federal or state resources that are going to enable work like Justice 40, that it isn't enough simply to share information about those resources, that there will be need to be some opportunities for providing access and interface across those stakeholder groups. And then, as I said colloquially, the kind of hand-holding that's going to lead to being able to tap into and actually acquire those resources and utilize them in the appropriate ways that are going to get the individuals and the organizations to their goals. So it's a multi-step process. It's a very complicated process. Very often, the importance and the significance of this work is minimized, but you can't get to solutions before you get through these steps to really build the confidence and the relationships that are going to take you to actually achieving your objectives.
Thanks. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I know there's probably other questions burning. We will be sending out a follow-up email with links and resources. So if you have other questions, get in touch directly, find us on social media, follow our newsletter, all of those things. And we have answered a couple of questions in the chat. I'll just hand it back to Deeohn in case you have any closing words for us. Oh, you're muted.
Oh, sorry about that, everyone. Yeah, I'd just like to share a few closing words if I can garner just another minute of your time. I want to thank everyone who joined us for this conversation today on creating community and climate change solutions in these challenging times. I want to thank the JPB Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and all of our historical individual donors who means so very much to us and so very much to the work that we're all working to do together. Again, I appreciate virtually meeting all of you today and sharing our thought leadership and strategies. Your continued support will ensure that the Institute for Sustainable Communities is able to advance equitable community and locally led climate change solutions and environmental sustainability, ensuring that gaps are tackled and no one is left behind. I look forward to convening with you again soon when we share the Institute's innovations in our international work. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can assist your endeavors. As Devin has mentioned, we'll follow up with some links to pertinent information and ways that you can contact us. And in the immediate, to learn more about the ways you can partner with us and to support our work, please visit www.sustain.org. Again, my thanks to you all, and looking forward to the next time we have the opportunity to get together.
Thank you, everyone. Feel free to unmute and say goodbye if you want. It's
Thank
great
you.
to see you.
Bye, everybody.